I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glenn.
Your Teagasc Sustainability Advisors, and you're welcome to the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast number 49, bringing you the latest information, science and opinion to improve farm sustainability. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution in the mid-1800s, temperature has increased globally by 1.2 degrees Celsius. However, what's even more alarming is the temperature increase has accelerated massively since the 1970s. Dr. Tom O'Dwyer, head of the Teagasc Signpost programme, chats to us about how we have found ourselves in this situation, Ireland's climate action plan, but most importantly, how farmers can be part of the solution to this global problem. Tom, look, you're very heavily involved in agriculture, number one, I suppose, and climate change, number two, looking specifically at gaseous emissions. But just to get a bit of background on what's going on, not just in Ireland, but globally, what has happened, I suppose, that we find ourselves in the position that we need a climate action plan to I suppose, get ourselves out of trouble?
Yeah, good question, Carl, to start with. A lot of scientists have looked at this, and I suppose what has emerged is that since the start of the Industrial Revolution in the mid-1800s, globally we've seen an increase in temperatures. So temperatures have increased by 1.2 degrees Celsius since about the 1850s. The second point is that that increase in temperature has accelerated over the last 50 years. So there was, a modest level of increase between, say, 1850 and 1970, but over the last 50 years, between 1970 and 2020, that has just accelerated massively. So massive upturn in the graph of temperatures in the last 50 years. That increase in temperatures is then linked to an increase in the concentration of the three greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So there's been an increase in the concentration of CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide in the atmosphere, and they all stand now at record levels. And I suppose then the final point I'll make is that it's now recognized that human activity has driven this increase in greenhouse gases, which has caused the increase in global temperatures. And we've seen a massive increase in the global population, but we've also seen an increase in the activities undertaken by our global population, including our patterns of production and consumption. So that's at a global scale. On a national scale in Ireland, we too have seen an increase in our temperatures. So our Met Service have looked back at temperature records over the last 100 odd years. And over the last 110 or 120 years, temperatures in Ireland have increased by just short of 1 degree Celsius. So our climate is changing also in Ireland, although sometimes we mightn't realize it, but records suggest that it is.
I've seen some of the stuff you've presented before over the last 100 years, and it's scary to see the change. Number one, the temperature. I think you have a lovely graph where you look at the temperatures and you have them color coded, where the temperature change goes from blue to red, and it's very red in the last 100 years. What have we done in the last? What have we changed? Is it just a population change, or are we doing things differently? What's gone wrong, really?
Well, I guess, Carl, it's a combination of both, and I think it then can be traced back to our increased usage of fossil fuels. So the extraction of fossil fuels from the ground and the burning of fossil fuels to provide heat, to provide energy, to power our cars. But also then, we can't run away from the fact that because of consumption patterns by that larger global population, we have seen an increase in agricultural production, including in Ireland. So, but if there were no farmers, there would be no food, and the growing global population requires to be fed. So there is a balance to be struck between food production and minding the climate. But that said, I think we have to accept that agricultural production generates greenhouse gases, so it is part of the problem. But I would be putting forward very strongly that agriculture can be also part of the solution.
Yeah, fully agree. And one thing that people often say to me, you mentioned 1 degree, Ireland went up, say 1 degree in in the last 100 years. Some people say, what's the degree between friends? Is it that big of a,
Yeah,
a jump?
yeah. I suppose you could look at that, but again, I suppose the first point I'll make on that is that if we look at the predictions for what's going to happen to Ireland's climate in the future, so we're likely to have the earlier start to growing season. That's a positive. We're likely to have more droughts, maybe not such a positive. We're likely to have more extreme weather events, not such a positive. We're likely to have longer growing seasons. That's going to be a positive for Ireland. So there could be a mixed bag in terms of the impact of climate on Ireland over the next 40 or 50 years. But I think on balance, it wouldn't be positive. But the worrying thing is that if you look at the modeling work that has been conducted by climate scientists, I suppose the scary thing is that once we exceed 1.5 degrees and definitely 2 degrees Celsius, that they talk about passing, I think, tipping points. That once it might only be 0.1 of a degree Celsius between, say, 1.9 and 2 degrees Celsius, or 2 and 2.1 degrees Celsius. But that 2 degrees Celsius is a significant point. And once you go beyond that point, you don't just get a small difference. You get a massive step change in the impacts of that increase in temperature. So that is concerning, and climate scientists have indicated that 2 degrees Celsius is a significant point. We're already at 1 degree Celsius, 1.2 degrees Celsius above where temperatures were back in the early 1800s. So it's not like we're starting from zero and we have all that space up to 2 degrees Celsius kind of to play with. We're at 1.2, and really we have to limit it to 1.5. So it might seem like very small things, but the climate scientists tell us that they can lead to significant changes.
Yeah, look, and if you're talking to anybody out in farms or in the J pitch or the pub or whatever, I think most people would say that they do see some change in our day-to-day weathers. For example, Southeast, I think we had 3 decent droughts in the last 5 years and mini droughts there as well. So I think people couldn't complain about that. So
Yeah.
in order to combat it, I suppose, Ireland has designed a climate action plan. Who has developed the plan and what's in it?
So the Climate Action Plan was developed by the Government of Ireland. So all the government departments are involved. It covers all the major sectors of the economy, including agriculture, but also transport, energy production, residential and office construction, land use change and forestry, and did I say transport? There's six sectors anyway included, Cathal. So it covers all of those sectors. It's a requirement of the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act of 2021, so a piece of legislation that was introduced. And it's a requirement that the Climate Action Plan is revised and reviewed on an annual basis. So the 2023 version of the Climate Action Plan was published just before Christmas. It's the action plan now that the whole of government is working to deliver on.
Yeah, and there was a big furore, I suppose, in the papers, on the news, about, I suppose, how much of a reduction the agricultural section would have to commit to. What are the emission reductions for agriculture, and how do we stack up against the other sectors?
Yeah, you're quite right, Carl. There was a lot of discussion in the media up to the middle of last year. And eventually in late July last year, the sectoral emissions targets were agreed. So the target for agriculture was 25%. So agriculture is required to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 25% compared to a 2018 base by 2030. But also, I suppose, what we shouldn't lose sight of is that beyond 2030, we will be required to do more and to get to a position of climate neutrality by 2050. So 2030 could be described as, a stage in the journey to get to 2050. In terms of comparison with other sectors, agriculture has the lowest target of the 6 sectors. Personally, I'm not so sure that it's helpful to compare agriculture with other sectors. Agriculture has got its target. That's what we should focus on. Let energy worry about its target and transport worry about its target. And comparing one sector with the other, not so sure that it helps, because it raises questions of, why did agriculture get this target and energy has a higher target, or transport has a higher target? That all happened, as you said. There was a lot of talk in the media up to the middle of last year. All that was debated. Targets are now set, and quite clearly in the Climate Action Plan, it's stated that the carbon budgets are agreed. Sorry, the legislation is in place. The carbon budgets are agreed. The Climate Action Plan now is agreed. It's now about getting on with the job and making things happen, about getting things done. So, yes, the targets are there. I think we need to focus on getting things done now and helping farmers to make changes.
Yeah, look, I agree. I think we spend a lot of time with in-house fighting, a bit of a blame going on, instead of concentrating on the solution rather than the problem. Just one thing to clarify for me: we talk about that 25% reduction, and we talk about megaton carbon dioxide equivalents. Can you just explain to people what is a megaton carbon dioxide equivalent? What does that mean?
It's the unit within which greenhouse gas emissions are measured. I suppose is how I'll start this answer, Cathal. So a bit like, you measure distance in kilometers or miles, you measure greenhouse gas emissions in million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. As I've mentioned earlier in the conversation, there are 3 main greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, that's CO2, methane, CH4, and nitrous oxide, N2O. And it was decided at an international level a number of years ago that in order to report on the greenhouse gases, that they would all be reported in terms of carbon dioxide equivalents. So obviously carbon dioxide is carbon dioxide, so you don't have to do any translation on that. But in terms of the methane and nitrous oxide, they are converted to carbon dioxide equivalents. And what has been agreed is that methane and both methane and nitrous oxide are more potent than carbon dioxide. So in other words, 1 kilogram of methane is 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide. One kilogram of carbon dioxide, and 1 kilogram of nitrous oxide is 265 times more potent than 1 kilogram of CO2. So those conversion factors are used to convert methane and nitrous oxide to what are called carbon dioxide equivalents. And Irish agriculture is responsible for 5.75 million tons. So our greenhouse gas national inventory is calculated by the Environmental Protection Agency. It's calculated on an annual basis. For agriculture, the main determinants of our greenhouse gas emissions are our animal numbers, particularly bovines, but all animals. Animal numbers because they generate methane. Fertilizer use and how we use our land, because that generates nitrous oxide. And carbon dioxide comes from our use of agricultural diesel, mainly from our use of agricultural diesel. So I think once listeners understand or can begin to get their head around the different types of gases and what drives the production of the different types of gases, I think that'll help farmers understand how their farming activities are contributing to this 5.75 million tons. But the 5.5, sorry, my final point then is the 5.75 million tons carbon dioxide equivalent for Irish agriculture is the sum of greenhouse gas emissions from each individual farm. Okay, it's a national estimate, and each farmer contributes something to that overall figure.
So what you're telling me is, if we were looking to insulate the world, nitrous oxide be the high quality insulator, methane the next good quality insulator, and then carbon dioxide, even though there's much more of it, the power of insulation is not as strong. But it just, I suppose what you're saying, Tom, is Nitrous oxide, methane are powerful insulators, and they'll contribute to global warming, so we have to reduce them.
The important point on methane, I guess, is that while carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide remain around in the atmosphere for a long time, okay, methane is a short-lived gas. So after somewhere between maybe 12 and 20 years, it's starting to disappear again. It's what's called a short-lived gas, whereas the other two gases are very long-lived. So and what that means is that the carbon dioxide that was released into the atmosphere on the burning of coal and other fossil fuels back in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s is still in the atmosphere and will continue to be in the atmosphere for hundreds of years to come. So there is a distinction from that point of view as well.
That's a vitally important point to make, because we can't turn the switch off today and the problem be solved tomorrow. So yeah, that's definitely a big one. Other people would say, Tom, to play devil's advocate, and I would often say actually to me is, we're such a small country. How like we have very hard targets to meet. Are we really going to make a difference?
Yeah, very good point. There's a couple of ways of looking at that. Firstly, there is only one atmosphere into which all these greenhouse gases are released. So whether the greenhouse gas, the extra ton of greenhouse gas is released in Ireland or in Germany or in France or in the United States or in China, it's a ton of additional greenhouse gas gone into the atmosphere, and it causes a problem. So, and the UN in its latest report last year, recognized that fact. Every extra ton of greenhouse gas makes a difference. So that's one point. So that's a reason for playing our part, albeit that other countries can play a much bigger part. Okay. The second point on that is that as a country, we are signed up to various international agreements to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, the Paris Agreement, which was an agreement at the end of COP. I can't remember what number COP, but the COP in 2015, wasn't it, in Paris? So the agreement at the end of that from all the participating countries was to limit the increase in temperatures to 2 degrees Celsius and preferably to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So Ireland is a signatory to that agreement and is bound by that agreement. And also Ireland is part of the EU, and the EU has its ambitious policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So as a member of the EU, Ireland is expected to take action and play its part. And the third reason that I'd mention is specifically from an agricultural perspective. We export probably 90% of the meat and milk that we produce on this island. And increasingly, our customers are demanding of our meat and milk processors that greenhouse gas emissions are reduced on the farm, okay, or all along the supply chain, but a lot of those emissions are within the farm gate. So for me, the third reason for taking action on reducing greenhouse gas emissions is to retain and potentially open up new markets for low carbon beef and milk. International customers are increasingly demanding that the footprint of beef and milk is reduced.
Yeah, look, you make a valid point there, because I was on a farm about 6 months ago and we were talking about COP actually come up, and this farm is very in sustainability, and he said COP needs to cop on and just make good on the commitments that they agree with and just get the job done, because we're running out of time. So I thought it was a good point he made. But just getting back, I suppose, to our climate action plan, what are the key targets that are outlined in the plan to reduce the emissions? I suppose how are we going to do it?
So look, the latest, as I said already, the latest climate action plan was launched just before Christmas. It has included a number of ambitions for agriculture. The high level ones are to reduce our usage of chemical fertilizer, so down by of the order of 25% compared to 2018. We've made significant progress on that in 2021. Now, albeit that was probably driven by the high price of fertilizer rather than the desire to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Nonetheless, in 2021, we probably got about 60% of the way towards that target in reduced fertilizer use. Of the fertilizer then that we are using, there's an ambition to increasingly use protected urea, because protected urea generates lower greenhouse gas emissions than other forms of nitrogen. Another target, it relates to the slaughter age of beef cattle, and also the age at first calving of suckler beef cows. There's a target in there about focusing on breeding animals that produce less methane, and to increase the area under organic farming. And there's also some things that are maybe a little bit further down the track, to make available a methane reducing slurry additive, and to make available a slow release pasture-based methane reducing feed additive. They will come probably later in the decade. And what struck me about the latest climate action plan, Cathal, was the increased ambition around land diversification. So it talks about increasing the area under tillage by somewhere between 50 and 60,000 hectares, increasing the area under forestry by increasing annual planting rates, and by increasing the area under organics. And if you look at the climate action plan and the target to reduce the 5.75 million tons that we spoke about earlier, one third of the reduction is linked back to that land diversification options. So, you know, there's probably questions over that, because, you know, some commentators would scratch their heads and say, well, look, that's not going to happen unless there's significant policy changes and or incentives. Now, certainly in the area of forestry, we see that there's a new forestry program. So it's anticipated that that's going to ramp up annual planting rates over the coming years. So, you know, let's see if that happens, but that's the anticipation, that, you know, the policies and the incentives now have changed for forestry, and once the new program is approved, you know, the anticipation is we'll see a big increase in forestry. And there was a scheme then to encourage farmers into organics last year. So I'm not sure how well that was what the level of subscription was for that. But again, that could have an impact in reducing emissions.
Yeah, so some of the actions you've mentioned are very, very achievable. So take, for example, protected urea. We had one of Signpost farmers on the podcast there lately, and it's something you can do overnight. And then some of the other actions you mentioned are behavioral change actions. They take a lot of time, like you said, to take policy change. But for behavioral change, you have to persuade people what they're doing. They could be doing something better. So you're head of the Signpost program. I suppose, how are you taking what's in that climate action plan, and how are you supporting farmers through the Signpost program?
Yeah, so our focus in the Signpost program currently is on working with our Signpost farmers in the first instance, to help them to adopt the climate mitigation technologies. That's, you know, my colleague Seamus Carney has developed the 12 steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for dairy and beef and sheep farms. So they're our guiding documents, and we're working with farmers to ensure that they correct soil fertility, they spread lime, they use protected urea, they take every opportunity to reduce fertilizer nitrogen, they make better use of animal manures, they look at their breeding decisions, try and breed better animals, they incorporate clover, and so on. So we're trying to work with farmers to help them to optimize their production system, both from the point of view of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also we're also keeping an eye on, you know, reducing the risk of nutrient loss to waters, enhancing biodiversity, and perhaps most importantly, from the farmer's perspective, we're only recommending actions that will maintain or increase farm profitability, because that's very important from the farmer's perspective, that the farm continues to generate an income for the farmer. So we're trying to look at all the angles, and we're not trying to help farmers to future-proof their farm through the adoption of the climate mitigation technologies.
Yeah, I think that's something that gets lost a bit in translation, that a farm has to be profitable. If it's not, how can you farm? You'll have to get it. It just won't work. What I think is very positive from the Signpost program, and I've been on a good few of them now, is it's very good to be able to have demonstration farms that there's a lot of output coming, that it's almost set step by step, I suppose, knowledge transfer and how to jump aboard and do the same. It's almost like operation transformation. You follow one of the people involved, and you try and apply it to your own farm.
Yeah, you could certainly look upon it like that. Demonstration farmers are recognized as playing two important roles. The first is to adopt the latest technologies and to be amongst the first to adopt the latest technologies. So my previous answer would have kind of focused in on that part of their role. But the second key part is the part that you've described, Cathal, which is they share their experiences and their stories with other farmers, so as to convince other farmers that, yeah, this is, this can't be wrong, because Mary or Johnny down the road, they're using protected urea, or they've reseeded the field into red clover, or in your own area of water quality, they've put in buffer margins, or they've moved the fence out, or whatever, and if you can see that happening on the ground on a commercial farm in your locality, and the farmer is saying, yeah, that was the right thing to do, and I don't know why I didn't do it years ago. I'm delighted with it. That's a powerful endorsement of the technology. So we're starting in the Signpost program. We're starting with the Signpost farms. We have 120 of those across the country, and very shortly, Teagasc will be making available a Signpost advisory program, because our ambition always was to move beyond the Signpost farmers and to engage every farmer across Ireland in a conversation around climate action, and really to ask farmers, what can you do on your farm to reduce emissions? Because it's only through the actions of individual farmers that we're going to achieve the reduction of 5.75 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. No one farmer is outside the requirement to take some action. The actions will differ from farm to farm. There's not a one size fits all recipe, but the challenge will be to identify with farmers what's the best mix of measures that you can take on your farm to reduce emissions while also remaining profitable.
Isn't that the biggest mindset change we have to make on farm? Is, like for water quality, you can see the monitoring data will tell you, right, your river's high in nitrate, but for a lot of farmers, gaseous emissions, carbon dioxide equivalents, it's all like an accountancy system. It's all up in the air. You can't see it. And what you can't see, it's harder to believe. It's a mindset change, really, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly. You make a good point. I suppose greenhouse gases are gases, so they're invisible. We'll never be able to see them. Whereas you can walk down to the stream and you can see if the stream looks clean or dirty. But I suspect as well that you can be fooled. The stream may look clean, but there may be things going on in the water or in the bed of the river that are not good. So you might say, oh, that's perfectly clean, but when you go and investigate, it's not quite right. So that then means that farmers and advisors like yourself, Cathal, have to look at the data, have to go to the EPA to see, what are the figures for that river. Likewise, for greenhouse gases, individual farmers at the moment, through their involvement in the Board Bia quality assurance schemes, are getting some figures for greenhouse gas emissions, but the figures are on a per kilo of product, per kilo of meat, or per kilo of milk basis. Teagasc, ICBF and Board Bia are currently working together to develop a digital platform which will provide a greenhouse gas emissions figure for each farm. So that to me could be a game changer, Cathal, because it will go some way towards making the invisible visible. Okay, so to your point, a farmer currently doesn't know what contribution his or her farm is making to that overall total for Irish agriculture. But we believe that through working with Board Bia and ICBF in this new collaboration, that from the middle of this year, for dairy and beef farmers starting off, dairy and beef farmers will have a very clear picture of the emissions generated on their farms. And to me, that's a starting point for beginning to look at what are the options to reduce that figure. You have to measure it first before you can manage it. So yeah, that's an important development.
Yeah, look, if it's written down, it's reality, and farmers like figures. So I think you're going about the right way. I think that you're right. Is it a game changer? I'm going to put you on the spot now just to finish up, Tom. Can we meet the targets, or is it too late? Do you have any advice for farmers listening in now?
I'd be confident that agriculture can deliver on the targets set out for it under the climate action plan. Absolutely. However, it's not going to be easy. But the couple of things I'd say: focus currently on identifying the situation on your own farm. So don't worry too much about the neighbor or the Irish situation. What's happening on your farm? What is the number on your farm? What part of the greenhouse contribution are you make? What contribution is your farm making to total greenhouse gas emissions? Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing then is with your advisor to identify the actions that you can take on your farm, and that are suitable for your farm. What contribution can you make to reducing the overall greenhouse gas emissions? And having identified the actions, well then, when are you going to get started?
Today.
I suspect a lot of people listening, probably farmers listening, probably have a sense that there's something there about protected urea that might make a difference, and so yeah, they possibly have a sense. Now, look, maybe I'm over. Maybe I'm not right in that, but I think that there's a lot of knowledge out there. I also think that farmers want to make a difference and want to play their part. And yeah, for me, it is look inside your own farm, figure it out for your own farm, and figure out what you can do on your own farm. And having done that, then you can also talk with other farmers. You can bring it up at discussion group meetings, bring it up in conversations with your advisor, maybe with your co-op representative, with your meat factory or whatever. What changes are going to be made, or how can I be supported to make changes? So talk to people about it. Don't be afraid to talk about people, because it's definitely on the agenda. And we have to figure out ways of getting making the changes. And the only way we'll do that is by working together. So that means we have to talk to one another. So bring it up in conversations with others. They're my messages.
Yep, super message to finish on, Tom. Look, really appreciate your time and keep up with the good work. And thanks a million for the chat today.
You're welcome, Cathal.
That's it for this episode of the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast. Thanks to Dr. Tom O'Dwyer, head of the Teagasc Signpost program, for joining us on the show. Listen in next time when we talk to Teagasc Director Dr. Frank O'Mara about the Teagasc Climate Action Strategy 2023 to 2030. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Cathal Summers. Join us next time for the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast, Signpost to Farm Sustainability.